We thank again Booz Allen Hamilton for their support of the Cyber 1.7 and the space classified programs. For those of you that have been to the Space Symposium in the past years, you know that the international aspects of the symposium has grown tremendously in the past few years. And you can see that by all the colorful uniforms that you see in the audience. Today's panel will focus on military-to-military new relationships in space collaboration. And I would like to introduce to you Major General Clint Crozier, Director of Plans and Policy at the United States Strategic Command, who will lead the panel. General, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to the Space Foundation for the opportunity to put together this panel on military-to-military engagements and international cooperations. I think, as you just heard from my boss, General John Hyten, the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, you can tell that we are passionate, as the words he described, about international engagements and international partnerships in the space domain. And so we've assembled a great panel here of senior space representatives from their individual countries. These are hand-picked members, and each represent countries that we have arrangements or partnerships with or ongoing activities with, be they exercises or symposiums or others. And so I think you'll find it's a good panel. I'm not going to say anything else other than move right into it, because we've got limited time and a number of great speakers, other than, again, just to highlight how important we see the international engagement piece and how important it is for us to build coalitions and partnerships in space, just like we do in every other domain. So with that said, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker from Italy. Colonel Piero Serra is the Chief of Aeronautical Space Policy Office at the Aerospace Planning Division, 3rd Department, ITAF Air Staff. He joined the Italian Air Force in 1982 as a flight test engineer. Upon completion of the space officer training, he was posted to the Procurement Directorate, dealing with the procurement of Italian military space systems, and then to the Defense Information and Security Department, working on remote sensing and dealing with the operation of Cosmo and SkyMed satellites. Since 10 September 2014, he is serving as the Chief of Space Policy Office of the 3rd Department of the Italian Air Staff, and is presently also a national delegate to the steering committee of the EU SST Consortium. So Colonel Serra, over to you.
Thank you, General. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank Major General Crozier and the Space Foundation to invite me to be one of the speakers of this stimulating panel within the Space Symposium. Let me also mention that space in Europe is born with Italy having an important role, also thanks to the cooperation of Italian Air Force General with the US. We have recently celebrated the 50 years anniversary of the launch of the first Italian satellites with a Scout rocket operated by an Italian team. This initial involvement in space activities was expression of the Italian defense interest in operational capabilities and in maintaining and improving the level of competencies required by this high technology domain. The main space applications that you well known are intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, position, navigation and timing, communications. And Italy has own assets or participates to all of them. For ISR, Italy uses the satellites that are part of the Cosmos SkyMed constellation, synthetic aperture radar sensor, and that will be replaced by Cosmos second-generation satellites in the next year. Also, we are acquiring optical satellites, and we have a multilateral cooperation with other partners. For SATCOM, we use secret satellites and Athena Fidus, some of them in bilateral cooperation with France. For PNT, we use the US GPS, and we participate as nations to the European Union Galileo program. I have not mentioned the Meteor satellites in LEO and medium Earth orbits, and European Union Copernicus programs that we also are in a multilateral framework. Therefore, Italian defense has a strong heritage in cooperation and believe in the value and benefit that cooperation can provide to the active participation and contribution of all the partners. The more and more contested domain of space asks nations to consider and to evaluate all the means to enhance the safety and the security of infrastructures and operation in space. These should meet the main objectives to be pursued by each spacefaring nation. Another objective, mentioned in words of other speakers, is to ensure actionable services in a domain that could be considered cool but not special. They are not my words. Space is a global domain. Next slides, please. And these are some of the satellites that I have been mentioned. And next slides, please. Space is a global domain which has the characteristics to provide the same reach to all the actors that have access to space. Therefore, cooperation is a value for all. In the space domain, there are no regions, but orbits. Next slide, please. In a more and more congested and contested domain, competition is surely present, and usually competition aims to maximize the returns. Competere, in Latin word, means aim together to the same objective. In this case, maximize the results in terms of security and safety of space infrastructure, operation, and services. Competition is also able to generate a positive energy for the benefit of the users and the customers. However, this model, more appropriate to the economy, implies that at the end, there could be a winner and a loser. The fear and the risk to be the loser has a negative impact on the relationship among the actors. Considering safety and security in the space domain, let me mention the cluster syndrome as example. If you have a loser among partners, all the participants will lose. Cooperation then is a positive answer, because it uses the positive energy of competition to generate quality, innovation, and better services, avoiding any negative collateral effects and consequently promoting further and perhaps better opportunities. Combined experimentations, exercises, and war games are positive ways too for exchanging views, knowledge, and experiences. These opportunities allow to develop concepts of operations, doctrines, standards, and techniques, tactics, and procedure, and to evaluate possible courses of action for different scenarios. Exchange of personnel, besides sharing of information, is also a positive means to increase interoperability and facilitate communication among partners. At the moment, combined exercises like Global Sentinel and Shriver war game could be considered among the best existing opportunities in the space sector. Speaking about space surveillance awareness, the Italian SST Operations Center is today a national and young capability. And for us, the participation to the Global Sentinel 2017 is an opportunity to contribute to multilateral capability in a very cooperative and valuable environment. Now concluding, to give the best possible foundation to the cooperation. Next slide, please, I forgot, I'm sorry. And next slide, please. We should look at the positive energy and effects of the competition, innovation, quality, better services, and fostering data sharing and strengthening the mutual trust to achieve the common and shared objectives of security and space, safety in space. These objectives can be maximized by cooperating. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Colonel Sierra. So I appreciate that Colonel Sierra mentioned Global Sentinel TTX, and I'm so glad that Italy, for the first time this past October, came out and participated in that Global Sentinel TTX, which is really an opportunity to think about and look at and explore how we knit space operations centers together for combined operations. It was a successful event from your perspective, I know, and the Italians will be out again this next year in greater force than this last year, and we're happy for that. Next up, I would like to introduce one of my friends, Brigadier General Burkhard Potocki. General Potocki and I have had the opportunity to work together for about the last 3 years in our capacities between the German government, the Luftwaffe, and U.S. Strategic Command. And General Hyten just made news as he announced this new multinational space collaboration effort that we are standing up out at Vandenberg. And I just don't want it to be lost on people, the significance of that. Since we stood up the JSPOC and went to Joint Space Operations more than a decade ago, it has been a Five Eyes construct for a lot of really important reasons and will continue to operate in that vein for those missions that it makes sense to do so. But with this MSC and the announcement that the Germans, he and I, are about this close to signing an agreement, we've been delegated the signature authorities for our two countries, and we are about this close to signing the agreement and making it happen. This will be the first new international flag we brought to Vandenberg since the joint JSPOC stood up more than a decade ago. So we're excited for that partnership with the Germans. General Potocki started his career as a fighter pilot. We won't hold that against him, though. He's become a space guy now. He's had, I know there's more pilots on the panel, I understand. Had several international assignments and operational tours. Since 2013, he's the division head for operations in the German Air Operations Command. His division is home to the National Interagency Space Situational Awareness Center that represents a central information hub for Germany's military use of space. The German Ministry of Defense recently released its strategic guidance on security and defense aspects, which I think he will likely talk about. And by the way, all of our panelists have agreed to take questions if we have time remaining. And General Potocki was a panelist here at the Space Symposium before. This is its third time here, actually, and we're looking forward to hearing from you, Burkhard.
Thank you, Clint, for your kind introduction, and thanks to the Space Foundation for organizing this remarkable conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the 33rd iteration of the Space Symposium highlights the broad trends in space that we are experiencing today. First, outer space is characterized by military, civilian, and an increasing number of private actors, as well as an ever-growing demand for space-based services. Secondly, satellites are indispensable assets for providing modern armed forces with global reconnaissance, satellite communication, as well as global navigation, timing, and positioning. As a consequence, the extensive use of space capabilities leads to our dependency and makes us vulnerable to disruptions by hazards and evolving threats. In the light of these trends and the enormous challenges ahead, the German Minister of Defense has issued a strategic guidance on security and defense aspects of space. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you the three major lines of action on which the German MOD is currently focusing. The first part of our strategic guidance describes our perspective on international issues, including the ongoing commercialization of space and the growing number of states that pursue space activities. Consequently, there is a need for improved space situational awareness, since the number of man-made objects in space is ever growing. The strategic guidance recognizes the need to establish rules for responsible behavior in space, especially considering the inherent dual-use nature of many space applications. The second part outlines the need for legal, organizational, and political prerequisites to improve national space security. As most of Germany's space activities are of civilian nature and take place in the context of European programs, we need to regulate space in an interagency, whole-of-government approach. Therefore, I'm very happy that this year's German delegation here at Colorado Springs comprises senior officials and experts, not only from the MOD and the Air Force, but also from the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy, the Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure, the Foreign Office, and the Chancellery. All these governmental entities play an important role in creating a regulatory framework for German space activities and in protecting critical space infrastructure and ensuring space security. The third part of the strategic guidance is probably the most important part for the Bundeswehr, since it describes the necessary steps to improve and establish military space capabilities, which include space support to operations, which means the provision of space-based and space-enabled services for military operations, and space operations. And finally, related developments in terms of procurement, training, exercises, missions, doctrine, and personnel. With the strategic guidance for space, the MOD is summarizing all space-related aspects of operational planning and command under the term military space operations, and thereby ensures that space as an operational domain is being sufficiently considered in all operations and activities of the Bundeswehr. We also set objectives regarding the services and support that the Bundeswehr is supposed to provide to our civil partners, first and foremost through the German Space Situational Awareness Center, that we operate together with the DLR Space Administration as an interagency organization. We are already providing collision avoidance and re-entry prediction data to other governmental agencies and private satellite operators. And now let me say a few words on how the MOD's strategic guidance for space relates to the topic of today's panel discussion, new relationships in space cooperation. In my view, what has started as an SSA exchange and cooperation testbed between our countries could evolve and expand into a network of national space operation centers collaborating under a combined space operating paradigm. This expanded cooperation requires three important aspects. First, the exchange of data and information is a critical enabler for shared situational awareness, as it provides partners with a common operational picture. Secondly, the exchange of national positions is crucial to the development of a common terminology and common criteria for properly assessing the current space situation. This includes policy and legal aspects as well as operational terms. And third, a lot of this can be facilitated through the exchange of personnel. The German Air Force deploys LNOs to our partners and does already have a liaison officer at the French Joint Space Command, which is led by our friend General Tastet. And as we all heard, soon we will send a liaison officer to JFCC Space. And I brought my friend and comrade, Lieutenant Colonel Pichler, with me. He is ready to go anytime we blow the whistle. So.
Very good. Very good.
Those exchanges have proven incredibly valuable as they provide insights on how our partners work and what their national perspectives are. Thus, the exchange of personnel facilitates a common understanding and helps coordinating our mutual efforts regarding safe and responsible space operations. Our objective is to pursue combined joint interagency space operations together with like-minded countries. And such combined space operations serve the following ends. They support our countries' assured access to space, they provide space support to operations, and they contribute to the protection of critical space infrastructure. But how do we get there? In my view, the prerequisites for combined space operations is interoperability on all levels, not only on the technical level, but also on the procedural, legal, and policy level. Naturally, the process of developing interoperability between multiple states will take some time. But I think that we have taken a few first steps to meeting our objectives, for example, with the US-led Combined Space Operations Initiative, where we have formed working groups discussing the policy, legal, and operational dimension of how future combined space operations could look like. And please let me conclude by saying that Germany is doing its homework and will continue working both internationally and on the national level towards these objectives and towards securing the free and secure use of space. Internationally, we work on laying the foundation for combined space operations, which will also entail the need to combine civil aspects like space traffic and frequency management and military space operations. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Burkhard. Thank you very much. So you heard General Hyten talk about Schriever War Game, and I think we all know how important that has been to us over the last couple of years. This past summer was the first time that we had our friends and partners from Germany and France participate in Schriever War Game. And what we really appreciate in particular about the Germans is, as you heard General Hyten say, coming out of the Schriever War Game this past summer, the collective team identified that we thought there was more work we needed to do. But rather than wait for another 2 years for the next iteration of Schriever War Games, the Germans raised their hand and said, hey, we'll host part 2, and we'll invite everybody out to Garmisch, which is, by the way, a beautiful place. And you pulled the whole thing together with about 60 days' notice, which was really impressive. And so thanks for that partnership, and it really helped us move forward. Next, I'd like to introduce another gentleman who I've had the pleasure of working with for about the last 3 years now. And Brigadier General J.D. Teste and I have appeared on a number of panels all over the globe together, actually, which has been a lot of fun. General Teste came on active duty in 1984, and he spent a real storied career primarily focused on intelligence and space operations. In 1993, he was assigned as the National Space Studies Center in Toulouse as a liaison officer for the Helios satellite. After the Joint Staff College, he was head of the Space and Intel Department at the Studies and General Plans Division at the Air Force Staff. Between 2005 and 2007, he took command of the French Guiana Air Forces and Capitaine Francois Massé Air Force Base in Cayenne, and I'm sure I said all of those poorly. Then he was deployed as the Deputy Head Homeland Air Operations and Air Defense Command between 2011 and 2012, then Deputy Director, Military Intelligence Director, and currently, since 2014, Commander of the French Joint Space Command. Brigadier General J.D. Teste.
Thank you very much, Clinton. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, first of all, it's my turn to express my most sincere thanks to the Space Foundation for having invited France every year since 2008. I think that after these days, next slide please, these days of brilliant presentation and relevant discussions here in this beautiful state of Colorado, we can all agree that we have never been so subjected to space as we have been to another domain before in history, in such a way that I'm not sure that we can really draw the functional analysis of our space dependency. Next slide, please. Okay. Space is a transverse domain for armed forces, which support every mission being planned or conducted in every traditional domain, land, sea, and air. With cyber, space is a 21st century operational domain where nations will exert their wills and their dialectics, and will confront each other in direct opposition. It's already a new strategic area of search for supremacy or superiority. In the same way we have seen in the past years, century, land, sea, and air standalone battlefield become a three-dimensional battle space. Next slide, please. I think important to remind you the evolution of the French strategic messages for space in the past 10 years. In 2008, the political message was that France was opposed that space became a new battlefield and would continue its diplomatic efforts in favor of the non-weaponization of space. The 2013 White Paper on Defense and National Security remains the same statement as in 2008 about space. An essential physical domain for almost every military and civilian activity. But the White Paper also stresses that a global common space must remain free of access and free of use by all nations, as in the meantime, risk and threats are increasing. Congestion of space enhances the risk of collision with another object. Technological evolution increases the risk of anti-satellite weapons development, particularly against low Earth orbit satellites. Today, in 2017, it is even easier to develop in-orbit or ground-based kinetic and non-kinetic devices made for disrupting or denying any space capability in low Earth orbit, but also to reach other orbits. Within the last decade, we have witnessed a real revolution with the arrival of a really professional private company in every space sector. The increase of the number of space actors and democratization of space and its products, both military and civilian, with more and more intricacy between them, In parallel, military, sovereign, and national space assets have evolved toward in cooperation capability, duality, partnership, etc. But we have stayed in the same coherent paradigm. We now have to face the next 15 years and imagine space environment in this period. Very few know what it will exactly look like, but it will certainly be more congested than today in all orbits, with more debris and maybe several mega constellations. We'll probably have to handle a different paradigm, allowing commercial use of services that are now considered as sensitive or classified. Different actors may conduct some action against spacecraft from Earth or from space in support of their operation or to show their determination. Next slide, please. It is obvious that it is now quite impossible to address all the operational capability, all the risk and all the threat alone, at least for France, but also clearly for most of its allies in NATO, in the EU, or outside this organization. For me, the first essential operation domain when addressing space is our ability to detect and understand the tactical and natural environmental and situation in space. This is also essential to comply with the need for responsible behavior in our military and civilian space operation. In this very domain, it is necessary to have the best picture and understanding possible. There are different ways of collaboration as they have to be driven in parallel. Exchange of data and information and coordination of national detection and monitoring assets. But I think this is not enough. Clearly, as we will have to face new behavior in space that might appear suspect at the first glance, we need to feed our political position with reliable information in order to build adequate, compliant position, compliant with international treaties, United Nations charters and conventions, law of armed conflict, etc., in order to address the situation responsibly. That means that we need to build sustainable trust and confidence between allies, but that we also need to base this collaboration scheme on reliable and consistent national assets. I have focused on space situation knowledge and understanding, but it is now not the only domain where we have to invent and implement new collaboration schemes. In the field of remote sensing or communication, future cooperation will enhance the involvement of private companies into a guaranteed access to images or bandwidth, as well as exchanges between nations in order to consolidate our resiliency. In the field of operation, we need to know each other better, and thus we need to train together. We need to confront our national procedure in order to learn from our partners. Next slide, please. Collaboration is not a political will anymore. It is a necessity. The need for resilience can't be addressed out of collaboration. Collaboration between allies and between the military and the commercial sector. Collaboration means partnership, and with allies, it means that to collaborate, we all need to bring assets, capabilities, know-how, interoperability, and trust. Finally, the higher level of collaboration is political and strategic. If we want to face together future risks and threats, we absolutely need to collaborate and exchange about them, about our policies, about our legal assessment of our action in space and action of other actors, in order to be coherent among ourselves, responsible, resilient, and efficient. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, JD. We really appreciate that. Next up from Canada, we have a newcomer to the panel. This is Brigadier General Frawley's first time here at the Space Symposium, so we'll give him a first-time welcome, right? Welcome for your first time here at the Space Symposium. Yeah, that's a Canuck. I know him. I see Kevin Brisky there in the audience. But we're happy to have you here. Brigadier General Frawley is the Deputy Commander of 1 Canadian Air Division in Winnipeg. And in that capacity, he's responsible for Canadian space capabilities and space operations. During his many operational and instructional flying tours, Brigadier General Frawley has accumulated over 3,000 hours on the F-18 Hornet. He's a graduate of the Fighter Weapons Instructor and Fighter Electronic Warfare Advanced Radar courses. Additionally, he is a graduate of the Canadian Forces Command and Staff College in Toronto and the U.S. Air War College at Maxwell. He holds a Bachelor's of Military Arts and Sciences from the Royal Military College of Canada and a Master's of Strategic Studies from the U.S. Air Force Air University. So he's relatively new to the team, a year or less in the position, but joining a long legacy and history of important cooperation between the U.S. and Canada in space. And to demonstrate that, just this past February, he served during our annual Global Lightning exercise, our big Tier 1 exercise that we do at STRATCOM every year. He deployed out to Vandenberg and served as our Deputy Commander of JFCC Space in a full combined integrated capacity through the duration of the exercise, and that was very valuable to both countries, I believe. So, Brigadier General Frawley, the mic is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir. Good morning to everybody. Thank you to the Space Foundation for the opportunity to say a few words on the panel today. And most importantly, I hope everybody enjoyed the beer last night. Next, actually, go ahead 2 slides, please. So Canada has some pretty unique defense and security challenges, as you can see from the slide here. Bounded by the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Arctic Oceans, with the U.S. To our south. We have the longest coastline in the world, and our population distribution, as you can glean from this nighttime view of Canada, they say that about 75% of our population lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border to the south. So what that means is an incredibly unpopulated landmass and a lack of associated infrastructure across most of our country, which does pose a number of defense and security challenges. So it becomes pretty clear that space is integral to our security and sovereignty in Canada. And also our civilian and commercial sectors are, like most of your countries, very much reliant day to day on space capabilities. Next slide, please. So what we do in defense space in Canada, in a nutshell, is we support the joint warfighter. And we do this through collaboration with other government departments, with our industry, and obviously with our allies. So I guess in doctrinal terms, that's Space Force enhancement is what we do the most of. But we also do some limited defense space control through our CANSPOC, which links in with the JSPOC. Next slide, please. Actually, go ahead, another one. So you can see that I don't have a chart that shows Department of Defense or Canadian Armed Forces space being prominent because of that collaboration. You can see we're actually embedded within the top bubble there. So space in Canada is very much whole of government. And in fact, the CSA, the Canadian Space Agency, leads any programs that we have, with the exception of any program that is D&D only. We work very closely with Canadian space industry, obviously, and we have some incredible partners in our Canadian space industry. And we also work with our international partners through CSPO and industry as well. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd highlight a little bit of what we do as far as space collaboration, and then talk a little bit about new relationships, and focusing on the mill as per the guidance from yourself there, sir. But starting with some of the things that we do internationally, we're very much involved with NAVWAR working groups, ISR. In fact, we share a lot of ISR, but I would suggest we pull a lot more from the United States. And we're very much, we collaborate significantly on SATCOM projects. We do a lot of Space Force development and training through courses that we offer in Canada. And we also attend a lot of courses south of the border. And from a space operations perspective, we do continue to work with the JSPOC and our other allies, our CSPO allies, in the CANSPOC. We actually have 30 OUTCAN hard space positions in the US, here in Colorado Springs, some in Vandenberg, and then scattered through different ground radar sites, missile warning sites, and whatnot. And we finally have a Sapphire satellite that contributes significantly to the space surveillance network. Next slide, please. As far as new relationships go, As I pointed out earlier, relationships are critical to what we do. We're fairly small, so collaboration and relationships are how we get things done. But I have to point out the new RCAF relationship because it's been about 9 months that space in Canada, defense space, has belonged to the Royal Canadian Air Force. So that's a new relationship that we're weaving our way through as we develop space and develop a culture of space within the Royal Canadian Air Force. Obviously, we continue to build relationships with other government departments who develop their space capabilities. Also with our closest allies through CSPO, and I can see growth within CSPO which will develop new relationships. And not on the slide, but also very important, our bilateral relationships that we have with our allies, the CSPO nations and other nations. I see an increased role for industry. I know that's not mill-mill, but after having spent time as the Deputy Component Commander, as General Crozier pointed out, I came back and one of my goals was to start including industry more in our Canadian space operations capability. So we've set that as a goal whereby in the future there will be actual seats in our CANSPOC. Maybe not manned 24/7, but we don't want to start building our relationships if or when it gets ugly in space. We want to do it now. So we're doing similar to what the JSPOC does. And then finally, we're developing an international space engagement strategy which will form these relationships in the future. And let's go to the last slide that I'm going to show, please. So this is just kind of a placeholder that we like to show. We're kind of proud of. This is what we do in Canadian defense space. You can have a look at it, and while you're are, I'll just highlight a few other important points. So all of that we do with 52 people. That's the size of my team. They're not all blue. It's a joint team, and I'm quite proud to say it's a joint team. I have Army and Navy folks that work for me, and that's critical when we design requirements for SATCOM for the Navy or ISR for the Army. Well, you need folks from the Army and the Navy in your team, right? So we have a very diverse joint team. And I think I'll end on that, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Blaise. Really appreciate that. Small but mighty, I will tell you. I've been to the CANSPOC, the Canadian Space Operations Center, and they do some pretty incredible work there. Next up, we have our partners from Australia. Brigadier Mick May is going to speak for us. I would like to say right up front, in terms of our partnership with Australia, strong as always and even growing stronger. I had the privilege and pleasure of being in Australia back in January with General Hyten as we held our annual STRATCOM Australia Talks, which we do every year, hosted by Vice Chief of the Australian Defence Force, Vice Admiral Griggs, and we spent a couple days in Adelaide and then a couple days in Canberra, and it was a wonderful trip, wonderful visit. We accomplished a lot. And then I also had the real privilege of being invited back just about a month ago as the Australian Air Force was holding its annual Air Force Symposium. They invited STRATCOM to come out and do a presentation on STRATCOM's capabilities and how they're important and integrated with the Australian Air Force, and I had the opportunity to represent STRATCOM at that speech in Melbourne as well. So strong and growing, ever stronger partnerships with the Australians. A graduate of the Royal Military College Duntroon, Brigadier Mick May has served as an infantry officer in the Australian Army since 1987. General May has a wide variety of staff appointments with departmental, joint, and service headquarters, as well as seconded to industry as embedded military staff in an outsourced agency. He is currently the Director General Military Strategy in the Strategy Group, Department of Defense, and leads the development of key defense planning and policy documents, including Australia's military strategy, quarterly and annual strategic reviews, and Australia's capability context scenarios. He also provides policy guidance to capability development across the Defense Integrated Investment Plan and leads strategic policy development on cyber, space, integrated air and missile defense, and undersea warfare capability, all of which I might mention are also STRATCOM missions, which is why we have such an important and close partnership. So, General May.
Thank you, General Crozier, and thank you for your great friendship with Australia. It was great to have you and General Hyten out earlier in the year. I'd like to thank the Space Foundation for having me here. I think it's an expression of probably courage and faith to have an infantryman, and particularly a light infantryman, speak at a symposium like this. If you ever want to ground your thinking, then bring an infantryman into the debate. I will speak to you from a strategic perspective, though. And before I do, I'll just provide you a little vignette from history, because I think it provides a good viewpoint on how Australia views the world and how Australia views space. So Australia is a byproduct of a science experiment. So Captain James Cook, the commander of the Endeavour, was sent on a around-the-world circumnavigation in the 18th century, and it was a combined Royal Navy and Royal Society, a science society, expedition. His primary mission was to actually measure the transit of Venus from the vicinity of Hawaii in the year of 1769. Now, for those of you that do astronomy in the room, and I'm sure there's a few, you'll understand the importance of the accuracy of getting the measurement of the passage of Venus, because that tells you how far, tells you how far the Earth is away from the Sun. Pretty fundamental. But he also had a secondary mission, and that was to seek evidence of the postulated Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. And the reason he had that mission was because the British were very keen to establish themselves from a strategic point of view in the Indo-Pacific. And they obviously needed to find somewhere to do that from. So we quickly morphed over a period of decades, and thanks to the US War of Independence, into a social experiment. And in 1788, Australia was settled using penal colonies. Now, many of the historians relate that in terms of the technology of the time to establishing a colony on the moon. And it was a seriously difficult endeavour, backed by serious government thinking and serious government funding. So Australia only came alive through its link to external entities, and that was our link back to empire. And that really dominated how we engaged with the world through our development in the 19th century, the establishment of trade links back to the UK, and into the 20th century as well. So Australia's commitment to the First World War was as part of empire. And we spent a lot of blood and treasure on that because it was critically important to us. It was the same in the Second World War. But after the fall of Singapore, we had to realign ourselves strategically to a much closer partnership with the US. So our capacity, we understood from the get-go the requirement to collaborate with other nations where our interests were aligned. And that has really set the tone for the development of modern Australia as we know it. We were part of the leading drafters of the UN Charter, for example. Very early trade engagement with Japan, very early trade engagement with China. So we are Eastern by disposition, Western sort of, by social structure, and most of our trade is predominantly to the north. And that's reflected in our Defence White Paper. So it was released last year, and it has three clear strategic defence interests. That's a secure, resilient Australia with secure northern approaches. We have some of the greatest growth in population in our immediate region to our north. A secure, nearer region, and a stable Indo-Pacific, and a rules-based global order. The government, in recognition of the link between Australia's reliance on space and its security, has a space utilisation policy. It's got 7 key principles to guide government and industry, and it's designed to protect Australia's interests in space. But importantly, from a point of collaboration, it helps define what interests we might have in common in working with other nations. And within defence, we also have a strategic policy statement on space. And it talks about Australian efforts to seek to maintain the security and sustainability of space through the development and promotion of international norms. And this involves, of course, working in cooperation with like-minded international partners to maximise the advantages that we derive from space. So in many respects, the policy settings for Australia in space are collaborative by design, because Australia is collaborative by design. So in terms of a secure Australia, a near environment in the region, the white paper is explicit in linking the security of Australia and its prosperity. It recognises that there is a very high dependence on space networks, and that space-based systems are critical to Australia from a national security perspective. And as mentioned already, we collaborate very closely with the US and with like-minded partners through CSPO in developing norms which can underpin a rules-based system for space. And that collaboration, as we've seen in this last week, enables new technology research, personnel exchanges importantly, and whether it's over good Canadian beer or not, ideas, resourcing and cost sharing. So just in conclusion, and to summarise our perspective, space is a global common. International cooperation is a necessity in that common. Stable rules-based global order is the best means to ensure our nation's continued access and use of space. And I think you will have seen throughout the week that that's a common viewpoint and a common interest. Cooperation reaps rewards together, and you get far more rewards and synergy than operating alone, and it enables assured access to space, and that's critically important for Australia from a national prosperity and a security perspective. And I think I might leave it there in the interest of time.
Thank you, Mick. And we very much appreciate you being here for the first time at the Space Symposium, so thank you. And rounding out our panel this morning, we have Air Commodore Alan Gillespie. Air Commodore Gillespie joined the Royal Air Force in 1988 as a university cadet and completed his degrees in electrical and electronic engineering. He then spent 10 years flying as a qualified weapons instructor on the Tornado F-3. He has a long history of really important jobs, including deployed into the Middle East and combat areas. He was the chief of the combat operations at the KAOC at Al Udeid, which I also spent a year at, and so I know the contributions that you made there. He deployed into Bastion Airfield in 2009. Again, that was a critical capability with the UK running that airfield, which is an important part of the US operations in the hub in Afghanistan. He later returned back to Al Udeid as the UK Air Component Commander. He's also commanded RAF Waddington, the Royal Air Force's ISR hub, and oversaw the introduction of UK-based remotely piloted air operations over Afghanistan. In his current capacity, he serves as the Battle Space Management Force Commander, responsible for space operations in the United Kingdom. I would just like to say on a personal note, so the United Kingdom was involved with Schriever War Games from the very beginning. The United Kingdom was involved with the very first Global Sentinel SSA TTX we did from the very beginning. The United Kingdom has been part of the Joint Space Operations Center from the very beginning, and so we have a long partnership there. And I personally, Al, appreciated your partnership in hosting me when I visited the UK last year as we went out not only to the UK SPOC, and talked and learned about ways we could better integrate the UK Space Ops Center and the Joint Space Ops Center, but then a great visit out to Fylingdales, which is under Al's command, which is also one of our most important and critical SSA nodes in the SSA network. So, Air Commodore Al Gillespie. Al?
Sir, thanks very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a great privilege for me to be able to address you today on new relationships in space collaboration from a UK perspective. And thank you to the Space Foundation for enabling me to do so. So I serve within Royal Air Force headquarters, as you've heard. I do have responsibility for Fylingdales and the UK Space Operations Centre. We provide strategic missile warning for both UK and US governments. We support the US ballistic missile defense system and provide a range of space support services in direct support of the joint warfighter, the MOD, and more broadly across the British government. UK Joint Forces Command also operates the, I would say, impressively resilient Skynet 5 constellation. We're already looking at replacing that with Skynet 6. Work is well underway, and we really welcome the absolutely essential cooperation with our allies to ensure that the compatibility and interoperability of our future Ballon line of sight systems continues. I don't need to convince anybody in here about the rapidly changing nature of the space environment. It will become more complex, more congested, more contested, as mega constellations become a reality and potential adversaries seek to capitalize on our potential over-reliance on space and the vulnerability that that might present to them. But however space develops and however the UK space sector develops, I'm absolutely certain of the need to provide resilience and redundancy through collaboration. Indeed, that collaboration provides a powerful deterrent effect in addition to the more obvious potential mission-sharing benefits that we might realize. In the UK MOD, we very much see use of space or assured use of space as a cross-government responsibility, and therefore operating more and more closely with the UK Space Agency to assist them in meeting their departmental requirements with an increasing focus on their licensing of UK spaceports and the spacecraft that will be launched from them. Within defence in particular, the MOD will publish its space strategy by July this year, and I hope to share our thinking on this as it evolves between now and then. A UK Vice Chief of Defence Staff space stocktake and the MOD's declared intent to nominate a 4-star lead for space are also indicative of the growing importance being afforded to this domain. The annotation of a lead 4-star command will bring much needed coherence to our space-related defence activity and present a much clearer point of contact for our allies wishing to collaborate. That space strategy will also recognise the increasing importance of space to 5th-generation warfighters as the UK prepares to welcome its first squadron of F-35 Lightning II aircraft in the very near future. We within the Royal Air Force have also started the procurement of a ballistic missile defence radar to be based in the Eastern Mediterranean. That will support NATO's ballistic missile defence requirements and of course have a secondary space surveillance capability. At the same time, we will upgrade or enhance the UK SPOC, in particularly the C2 capability and capacity within that, to ensure that we can communicate rapidly in near real time with our other partners you see here on the stage. Also, our very recent purchase of a Carbonite 2 Earth observation satellite, I think, further demonstrates intent to invest in our space-based capability and explore the opportunities that might be presented by smaller LEO-based constellations that have shorter, tactically relevant revisit times. The UK Defence Review in 2015 mentioned collaboration with our partners within the Combined Space Operations Initiative and our support to the UK Space Agency in delivering services as part of the EU Space Surveillance and Tracking Initiative with France, Germany, Italy and Spain. The clear imperative through all of these initiatives is to data share, SSA data obviously, threat data, SATCOM capacity as other examples, but our legacy systems are not necessarily designed to allow that level of real-time data sharing. And this must be one of our top priorities bilaterally and further downstream multilaterally as we look to advance that collaboration further. Although we're talking here today on a military panel, lessons from recent experience remind us of the need to collaborate as much with our civil and commercial partners. We took the first steps towards our vision of a MIL-CIV commercial SPOC with last summer the introduction of a UK Space Agency analyst into the UK SPOC and the delivery of services to European nations as part of that EU SST initiative. So from a UK perspective, we've made substantial progress over the last few years. The future does look increasingly complex from both military, civil and commercial perspectives. So there's much more work to do in delivering the collaboration we all aspire to. And we in the UK remain strongly committed to working bilaterally and multilaterally to help us all realize that vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. So I've had a number of questions come in. We just have a minute or two left. If we keep our answers short, I might be able to get two in. So let me go. First question, Canada, Brigadier General Frawley. The question is, what was your biggest takeaway that you learned or observed serving as Deputy Commander of JFCC Space during the Global Lightning exercise?
That's a great question. So essentially, I deployed down to Vandenberg and really realized that if we're going to do the SPOC, the combined SPOC well, then we need to be able to communicate well between our SPOCs. And in fact, I put in a request such that next time we do Global Thunder, I would actually carry out my duties as the component commander for space for Canada from my Canadian location, which would be a forcing function for us to communicate better, try to get into some of the civic's and the chats so we understand better what's happening.
Very good, thank you. And just one last question, given the time. This one I'll go to General Testé in France. You talked powerfully about the need for collaboration and partnership. Do you foresee space collaboration in the next 15 years or so to be under the aegis of big organizations like the NATO and EU, kind of like the question of General Hyten, or more bilateral or multilateral, or both?
I think, well, to be short, that bilaterally is the best way to build confidence and mutual knowledge. So the priority will be first to build a bilateral relationship, but the final goal is to have a multilateral collaboration.
Good, very good. Well, that's all the time we have. Once again, I'd like to thank the Space Foundation for sponsoring this international panel. I hope what you've seen and what we've been able to demonstrate here is that we are all committed to integrating, collaborating, and cooperating towards a common goal, and I appreciate all of our panelists for making the trip out to Colorado Springs and being with us today. So thank you. Have a great morning.